All right, says we're live. How's everybody doing? This is Corey DeAngelis, the co-host, a senior fellow with the Americans for Fair Treatment. I'm also a research fellow with the Heritage Foundation, and my co-host is here with me, Chip Rogers. He's the CEO of Americans for Fair Treatment. I'm looking forward to seeing you next week, Chip, in Orlando. You've been there for quite a while.
It's
in and out.
Yeah, my third time in Orlando in the last 5 weeks. And I am a Floridian, so I'm happy to be back.
There you go. So we have a lot of stories to go over today. The tweet says it all for the first 20, 30 minutes of our conversation, which is we have a new lawsuit that I've been praying for years that someone would do something with this. And we have the new Civil Liberties Alliance. Two of their attorneys are going to join us for 20, 30 minutes to talk about a new lawsuit that originated in Nebraska, apparently declaring the public school system unconstitutional because it violates our First Amendment rights. We'll dig in deeper to that in a second. On the second half of the show, we're going to talk to a Florida senator by the name of Jonathan Martin. You might remember from a previous podcast, Chip and I talked about a big victory out of Florida, holding the teachers' unions accountable. Governor Ron DeSantis signed it this year, even though the teachers' unions out there were crying about it left and right. It has a couple provisions, but it finally brings some accountability to the teachers' unions. We will talk to the bill sponsor a little later. I have some good news that we're announcing from the Americans for Fair Treatment today, a new milestone. You can see this at the top of our website. We have surpassed 20,000 members nationwide at Americans for Fair Treatment. I love this slogan, my dues, my choice. You can join us today as well. You go to myduesmychoice.org, or if you want to do it the easy way, americansforfairtreatment.org as well. How does it feel, Chip, to finally hit such a big milestone as 20,000 people?
Well, it just goes to show the thirst that people have for supporting public sector workers who don't want to be part of this union machine that is unfortunately not representing them any longer. And so we started, just a year and a half ago, beginning of 2025, with about 750 members. And now we, as you just mentioned, hit 20,000. So we want to thank everybody. We can't thank you enough for joining the cause. And we're going to continue to fight for those public sector workers, whether they be teachers, law enforcement officers, firemen, whatever. If you're working in the public sector and you're not being treated well by your union, we want to defend you. We want to help you. And most importantly, at the end of the day, we want to get union money out of politics. Look, these teachers, these law enforcement officers, these firefighters, they deserve to be represented by their union. What they don't need is their union getting involved in politics, especially the way it's happening now. And you're going to hear some alarming numbers later in the show. Mm-hmm. Corey, we do this Where Do Your Dues Go report. And we're going to show some stuff from Florida that will probably shock you.
I was shocked. I was shocked when I saw it. I was like, you got to triple check these numbers. They can't be right.
So stay tuned for that. We'll get to that in just a minute. But 20,000 members, big accomplishment.
Yep. And I think I had can you see this freezing going on, Chip, with my screen? I'm going to remove myself real quick and put myself back.
All right. Now I get to show all by myself now.
I'm still freezing up, but you can hear me, right, Chip?
We can hear you, yeah.
Okay, well, that's I guess all that matters. Maybe we should cover up my face anyway. But without further ado, let's get into the meat of the show. We have two great guests today. We have Margot Cleveland, who's with the new Civil Liberties Alliance. And we also have Jeanette Brown, who's also with the new Civil Liberties Alliance. You can see in the background of her screen, she got NCLA in the background. Thank you, ladies, for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
So let's get right into it. We have a lot of ground to cover. I mean, this is an eye-popping headline, to say the least. What gave you the idea for this case of basically saying the public school system as it is today is operating in an unconstitutional way? Why did you pick Nebraska? Give us some of the details on the case.
Sure. So This case stems from an article that Philip Hamburger wrote some years ago in the Texas Law Review, and that actually was preceded by an article by Stephen Giles with this basic premise that education is speech, which factually seems undebatable, and that the educational speech belongs to parents, which is legally undebatable. Constitutional cases have long established that parents have a fundamental right to direct their children's education. And so we were looking for, and Philip was looking for, a way to expand the right of educational choice, parental choice to families beyond, for example, First Amendment freedom of religion type cases, et cetera. So the First Amendment belongs to everyone, and that's kind of what's behind it. The case is brought in Nebraska, which is one of the worst schools or one of the worst states in the nation for public choice. They have no public choice, essentially, for education. They have no funding for anything other than government schools. And so while public schools, in our view, wouldn't necessarily be constitutional or unconstitutional on their own, or we're at least not taking a position on that in this lawsuit, the facts of a government requiring parents to provide the speech, then in Nebraska, for instance, paying the equivalent of $19,000 per year per student if you will sacrifice your own educational speech and take the government's viewpoints, that's unconstitutional. It's unconstitutional as a direct abridgment of the First Amendment, and it's an unconstitutional condition on the public benefit of educational funding.
So I've seen something about there's two things that the government must prove if they're going to violate our free speech rights. They have to have a compelling interest, and it has to be the least restrictive means. Could you explain what the heck that means in layman terms?
Sure, and that depends on the type of First Amendment claim at issue, but our claim does assert viewpoint discrimination, which is one of the worst types of First Amendment violations. So least restrictive means, which is what the government must show, is that they're not restricting any more speech than is absolutely necessary. They can't overreach. They can't try and go beyond what is needed for a state to achieve the other part of the test, a compelling interest. It has to be a very serious state interest that could overcome First Amendment rights, okay? It's not general police power. It's not, we'd rather people think this way, right? It has to be something super important.
So the government could respond and say, well, government education is so important. We need to educate the public. And what would be the response to that?
Well, we don't take issue with the fact that children should be educated, and that's fine. But coming back to the compelling interest, number one, it's already established by Supreme Court precedent that the government does not have a compelling interest in making kids go to public school.
Okay.
So that's that was established in the 1920s.
Could you go over some of that Supreme Court precedent? I guess there's Wisconsin v. Yoder, the Pierce decision. If you could just give us a kind of a high level synopsis for the listeners.
Sure. And it's funny because some of this stuff started actually in Nebraska. So there's a Meyer versus Nebraska case where Nebraska had tried to outlaw in sort of the World War era German speaking in public schools or even other modern languages. And the Supreme Court said that Nebraska had no public interest, no compelling interest in stopping parents from providing language instruction to their children through a school. So that was kind of the beginning of it in the 1920s. And the Pierce case that you mentioned, Pierce versus Society of Sisters, also a 1920s era case from the United States Supreme Court. And in that case, the state, I believe it was Oregon, might have been Washington, did try to compel parents to put their children in public school. As you know, there was a viewpoint in the late 1800s, early 1920s that public school was sort of the end-all be-all and we would make children into widgets. So that state took it a little bit far, made it a mandatory requirement. And the Supreme Court said, again, a state might have a compelling interest in education, but not in public education, and certainly not an interest that overcomes parental and other 14th Amendment rights.
And the child is not the mere creature of the state.
Exactly.
So yeah, Nebraska is
if-
one of the worst states for school choice. Go ahead, Chip.
I was going to ask, what if Nebraska just said, okay, you're right, we're no longer going to compel children to go to school. There's no more mandatory attendance to school. Does that actually solve the constitutional issue?
It doesn't solve the constitutional issue because of the unconstitutional conditions problem. So, in other words, Nebraska provides the public benefit, not only funding, honestly, but other benefits for kids who are in public schools to the tune of over $19,000 per year. But it conditions that public benefit on parents not asserting their own viewpoint, their own educational speech. And so just removing the mandate doesn't entirely fix the problem.
What if, so look, I've often held, I mean, I think we get tied up, not we on this program, but society gets tied up in this idea that education happens between, 8 a.m. and 3:30 p.m. And that's I mean, I think about my own 4 children. Yes, they went to school and they did go to private schools, but that wasn't the only education they received. They got education when they got home. And back in those days when Khan Academy was first coming out, I was making them do Khan Academy every day. And so they were learning and receiving education from a multitude of different sources. It wasn't just the school during the day. So what about that argument to say, look, parents can, teach them whatever they want when they get home?
Right. Well, the problem here in part is the volume, right? For example, in Nebraska, you're talking about kids having to be submitted to this educational speech at a minimum, right? Kindergarten through 12th grade, so 13 years, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, 9 months out of the year. As a practical and realistic matter, parents can't overcome that. And coming back to one of the other cases that Corey had mentioned, the Yoder case, in that case, it was an issue of whether or not Amish parents had to send their children to 2 additional years of schooling, whether they had to send their kids through high school or more high school. And the court recognized there that if it required Amish parents and families to send their kids to these public schools for that extra time, just that extra time, that in and of itself could decide those children's religious future. Right. And so if you take that and then multiply it by, 6 plus to get to 13 years, it's clear that parents just can't overcome that volume of speech.
Could you guys go over the plaintiffs and their stories? Like why is this such a big deal to be stuck in the government school system? For a lot of our listeners, they probably understand a lot of what's going on in the public schools, but what specifically is included in the lawsuit that the plaintiffs are alleging is happening in the public school system?
Sure. And again, to be clear, the First Amendment's for anyone. So any viewpoint that disagrees with the public schools, the person has the right not to be there, right? But in terms of our plaintiffs in this case, in each instance, they had their children in public schools initially, at least their oldest children, and they found them increasingly being submitted to gender fluidity, gender identity type of discussions that, was not just, and this is the point of the lawsuit, it's not just one topic in one classroom. It goes and proliferates the entire day, right? From the first time a kid gets on a bus or walks in the door till the end of extracurricular activities, it's there all day with pronoun policies. It's part of the entire day. It's part of the school policy. It's enforced all day. So it's that type of thing. There are other things, sort of anti-American type speech, anti-law enforcement type speech, sort of frightfulness around climate change and parents causing harm by driving their car, all those sort of fear-driven or cultural messages that any parent might disagree with.
So does your lawsuit call for universal school choice, or what's kind of what can we expect to happen if we have a victory?
Sure. And I'm going to ask Margot, why don't you go ahead with that one?
You're muted, Margot.
Can you hear me now?
There you go. You're being too kind
Great.
by muting yourself.
So sorry. So one of the things about this lawsuit to keep in mind is it is not asking to throw out the public school system. It's not asking for the legislature to do anything specific to remedy this universal problem. What it's doing is asking for a declaration that the system in Nebraska violates the parents' free speech rights, and for a very narrow remedy for these plaintiffs, which is the funding of their educational speech on an equivalent scale as to what the other public school, what the public schools would get. It will not uproot the Nebraska public education system. It's not going to institute any vouchers. It leaves for the Nebraska legislature to decide what the appropriate remedy is in this case, in the case of their unconstitutional school system.
So yeah, I'm trying to follow it. So the argument would be that the state is spending over $19,000 of public money, and they're mandating that children go to school, and then they tell the parents the only way you gain access to this $19,000 of public funding is to go to the public school that we set up. You can't access anything else. And if that school violates your First Amendment rights, too bad, you still have to go.
Absolutely. And keep in mind, it's not that they're going to the public school. It's that they are subjecting themselves to the speech that is taking place in the public school system. And this is where I think that people, it's logical, but you never really think about how is education transmitted? How is knowledge transmitted to students? It is through the textbook, the curriculum, what the teacher says, what types of stickers are on the doors, what types of signs are on bathroom doors, what types of hall room conversations are taking place. That is speech. By definition, you have to use speech to convey knowledge and education. And as Jeanette said, that is the parent's right. That's actually one of the things that I love about this lawsuit is it is not actually asking for the courts to do anything new. It's built on precedent, and it's saying, this is what the courts have said. This is what the courts have said. This is actually the conclusion flowing from all of those decisions.
Would you say that the status quo is compelled government speech? I've heard that term thrown around before, or is because the kids have to, if they want to get an A on the assignment, they have to regurgitate this kind of government viewpoint, or at least they feel like they're compelled to do so, and then they have compulsory education laws at the same time. Is that part of the lawsuit, or is it kind of tangential?
I mean, I think that there's a couple of different lenses to look at this through. For the purposes of our lawsuit, there is mandated content, right? So the state mandates that parents provide this speech, which is highly unusual. Think of any other case where speech is compelled by the government. Normally, that in and of itself is a First Amendment violation, right? But here, again, compelling interest, states have or cases have recognized states have an interest in education. So here, the government is compelling that content, right? And then to your point, only to their viewpoint. Now, in any individual school or case, and particularly as the child gets older in school, there certainly is an element of needing to please the teachers, to regurgitate what has been said back, to not say anything essentially unnecessarily frictional. And so I think that I would take issue with calling it government speech because, again, I think it's parent speech. But I do think there is an element of compelled content at a minimum and sometimes compelled content viewpoint.
Is there a path for this to get to the Supreme Court and affect other states too, or is this Nebraska specific?
No, it shouldn't be Nebraska specific. I mean, the question would be, the precedent, first of all, it should be able to go from Nebraska. We sued in the trial court level. It would go up to the Nebraska Supreme Court. And from there, it could go to the United States Supreme Court. Once you establish that precedent, that yes, only funding government viewpoint when you mandate the content is a violation of the First Amendment, that precedent could apply widely. Now, whether it has an effect in a state, for example, that already has universal school choice, Probably not, because the state is providing other options. But where the state does not provide other options, it should have an effect.
Right. So Arizona, they have universal school choice. Florida, they have 600,000 kids on scholarships. So maybe not as big of an issue there, because you can already escape the government schools. You can take the public money, or at least a portion of it, to a private school that may be more aligned with your values, or even homeschool in some of these states. You can use it for homeschool funding.
Exactly.
And so that solves the problem, right? So there are less restrictive means, right? You can still fund public education. You can still have the public schools. But in order to not violate all these parents' rights, because you're always going to have a problem, right? It's a one size fits all if there's no choice. Even if you move the curriculum to the right, well, then you're going to upset the people on the left. And so it's not even really a one-sided political issue, right? This can cut both ways.
100%. I mean, like I said, the First Amendment is for everyone. So, if back in the days, and even sometimes now, if a school has, biblical verses requires, religious teaching, etc., that right would belong to people who object to that as well.
And isn't that why Catholic schools were set up in the first place? Because a lot of the public schools were de facto Protestant. And so, it's existed throughout history.
Would the new federal education tax credit, if a state opted in, would that not negate the argument here?
No, it won't negate the argument, and Nebraska has opted in.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a tax credit, okay? It is not actually government funding for education. So nothing about that diminishes the fact that Nebraska is giving $19,000+ per year per student for people who will accept its viewpoint.
Yeah,
and that's
you pointed out something really important that I think we all forget. A tax credit, and the courts have ruled this way, it just means that the person who earned the money doesn't have to pay the government a certain amount of money. It's not government money, which is really important, as opposed to a voucher, which would be government. None of this money is government money, but it's money the government collected. Yeah.
And it's not like those Nebraska parents, because Nebraska opted in, are going to get $19,000, $20,000. It's a $1,700 tax credit per year per individual, or $3,400 for a married filing jointly, household of two, of a married couple. So it's still, there's a private dollars, and this is a lawsuit against Nebraska, the state. This isn't a lawsuit against the federal government, right?
Correct.
If the legislature though responded and said, okay, we get it, this is bad, we're going to give you universal school choice at the same funding amount, that would in fact take away the argument, right?
Absolutely. I mean, what we're seeking here is a level playing field, right? And that can be achieved in any number of ways. That would certainly take care of the issue.
It would be a strange world indeed if we got to the point where the opponents to educational freedom saw this lawsuit gaining some serious traction and became so fearful of it going to the U.S. Supreme Court that they themselves urged the Nebraska legislature to solve this locally.
I'm a Nebraska native, so I'm actually all for that.
Yeah, well, whatever gets us to the finish line to give children the educational freedom that they deserve, and this is a unique way to approach it, and one that has not, to my knowledge, been attempted before. So we really appreciate you taking this on. This is important stuff.
Yeah, and I want to point out that these kind of ideas started to get on my radar back in 2018. I actually wrote something for the Detroit News with Neil McCluskey, who was at the Cato Institute at the time. And we had read a Florida Law Review article from 2013 by a guy named, the first guy's last name was Salander, and the other one was Calabrese. And there was this argument that they made that the public school system is unconstitutional because you can't have religion apparently in the public schools, or at least they don't implement it that way. And because of that, you're violating the 14th Amendment because you're discriminating against religious people. Do you think that kind of case. I don't know if anybody else has done a case like that. Do you think there are merits with that line of argumentation too?
Margot, go ahead.
So I think that I'd have to look more at that law review article. And I think that the theory behind that is that it is instituting a religion of non-religion. And you do see that in some of the schools that are adopting secular ideas, as if, putting the environment above God. So I think there is a potential there. I think this one is cleaner because we know what all the precedent holds. We know what speech is. We don't have to show that there's a religion of no religion in the schools. And also, it applies across the board. So the Mahmoud case that the Supreme Court recently came out with, which was based on parents and the free exercise right, that was looking at very specific issues. Here, the case is looking at the entire curriculum, not just the curriculum, everything going on in the school. So while that might be another legal challenge, I think that we have a really solid one that is based on what the Supreme Court has said the law is in a whole host of areas.
Yeah, I think this is a cleaner argument. It's more far-reaching too, right? Because it's not just certain groups; it's everybody has their free speech rights violated potentially in the public school system today, if they don't have exit options. And yeah, I mean, I remember some of your plaintiffs. Mr. Jacobson, he has 4 kids, right? 2 of them are in 5 kids, and so a couple of them are in private schools. One's homeschooled. One's in the public school, but he's told you guys, right, that he would send them all to private school if he had the funding to do so. And he's forced to pay for the public schools that he doesn't want to use.
Right. That's exactly right. And also following up on the question that you'd asked to Margot, I mean, in the free exercise area and also in the equal protection area, courts have essentially said, that states don't have to pay for anything beyond public education. And part of that, I think, particularly in the free exercise area, is because in theory, whatever religious speech occurs in a public school is going to be very, very de minimis, even more so now, right? And that content, again, isn't mandated by the state. And so states are usually happy to back off. But the First Amendment content is mandated. And the same thing with equal protection. There's been a lot of challenges to state school funding under equal protection grounds, saying one school gets too much, another school doesn't get enough. Those challenges historically have failed. So this First Amendment lens puts things through a different, type of analysis and scrutiny on what is the compelling interest and what are the limitations.
Look, I may argue with you a little bit on religion because, what is religion in 2026? I would argue that some of the environmentalism that's being taught is actually a religion. That's certainly the way they behave. So it may be being taught, but again, it's a violation of First Amendment rights if you have to sit there and be compelled to listen and regurgitate it. I think it just gets to the core of what all of us have been arguing. I know I've been arguing this even as a former legislator. I probably go back and find videotape of me saying this from the well of the Georgia Senate, and that is society has decided that we're going to take money from tax from people who earn it to use it for the purpose of education. The question is, who decides the education? And historically, we've always said, well, this should be the government deciding, and we're going to use this brilliant idea of we're going to send you to the school based on your U.S. postal mailing address, as opposed to allowing the entity or the person that cares most about that child's well-being, the parent, make that decision. So it really comes down to the money's already taken from the taxpayers, it's collected, and it's being spent for education. The real question is, who decides where those education dollars go? If we as a country would just finally wake up and say, you know what? It's the parent, not the government, this problem would be solved.
That's right. So we're running out of time. Again, I want to echo Chip's comments. We thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. Could you guys give us, before you go, what's kind of the timeline from here? You filed the case recently in Nebraska, and what's next? What should we be looking out for?
So with any lawsuit, after you file it, you have to put the defendants on notice. We got to serve them with a summons. And anytime you sue the government or a government official, they generally come back with some sort of immunity defense and a motion to dismiss. So that's typical sort of rules of the road for suing the government. That's kind of what we expect here. Maybe we'll be surprised, but we did sue a number of both state and local officials. So logically, there's going to be a motion to dismiss that comes up.
Which will mean it's going to be some time before we have a decision on the case, but hopefully the law will develop and it will make clear that educational rights are the parents' rights to speech.
All right, well, we'll all be watching. We'll hopefully have a victory lap sooner than later, and we'll keep our followers engaged and checking out every step of the way. I have a Washington Post piece coming up, hopefully next week, in favor of the case as well. So listeners, be on the lookout for that. But we want to thank you guys again for joining the Red Pen podcast, powered by Americans for Fair Treatment. Jeanette Brown from NCLA, and also Margot Cleveland. Thank you guys so much for joining us and giving us so much time today.
Thank you for having us and bringing
Thanks, guys.
attention to this important issue. Appreciate it.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. See you guys soon. All right, Chip. So we have another guest. We're jam-packed guests today. We mentioned earlier that we have Senator Jonathan Martin from Florida. Sorry, I didn't forget your name, Jonathan. I'm doing multiple things at once on the computer. But we talked on a previous podcast, Chip and I, about Senate Bill 1296 out of Florida. And this is probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest victory this year when it comes to holding the teachers' union's feet to the fire. It was such a big deal that their teachers' union president in Florida, which before we have Jonathan join the stage, we got to share one more thing from Americans for Fair Treatment, where I almost didn't believe these numbers, Chip. The Florida Education Association, they have a president. His name's Andrew Spar. He got on social media every morning when they were debating this bill by Jonathan Martin, and he was just crying about it. He was in his neighborhood, huffing and puffing, walking around saying, oh my goodness, this is good. The sky is falling, and this is going to be the end of the world as we know it, just because we'll get into what the bill actually does, but it holds the teachers' unions accountable. It helps the members, even if union bosses who make $390,000 a year don't like it. But I'm going to bring on the screen real quick. If you go to the My Dues, My Choice website for Americans for Fair Treatment, you might see at the top, you can click this headline, Teachers Are Walking Away from Their Union in Florida. And we have a graphic that I shared on social media. You can go on the website and look at all the headlines, but kind of the skinny of it is here in this tweet that I put out from AFFT. Look at the bar chart. This is union membership from the Florida Education Association just about 5 or 6 years ago in 2020. 5 years later, it dropped from 143,000 to about 115,000. 28,000 members left the Florida Education Association in 5 years. That is almost 1 in 5 members. That is a 19.5% decline. The teachers are walking away, maybe because of what's seen on this side. Only 14.6% of the total funding from FEA, this blue part of the pie here, went towards representing teachers. How much went towards the national unions? Randy Weingarten and Becky Pringle, almost half of the funding, 45%, went to the NEA and AFT, Randy Weingarten's union and Becky Pringle's union, and they make over $500,000 a piece every single year. So I'm glad the AFFT is putting this information out, Chip. This is our second state, right? We did Pennsylvania first, and now we're exposing the unions in Florida. And it's very helpful, especially the graphics that go out.
You know, a couple of things, Corey, that number of the teachers who have left the union is actually a little bit more impressive, simply because over that time period, with Florida being one of the fastest, if not the fastest growing state in America, there were thousands of additional teachers
right, exactly
hired. So as a percentage of the total teachers, it's a drop even more than is indicated on that graph. But the reason there's a drop is because the legislature and the governor have done a lot of great things. We'll talk to Senator Martin in just a second about the latest in that string of great activities. But beyond that, think about, if you look at those numbers again, imagine this deal if someone came to you and said, look, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take money out of your paycheck so that we can represent you in case, you're sued or whatever. That's the con game that they typically play.
Yeah.
And here's what we're going to do. We're going to take 100% of the money from you, of course, but we're only going to use 14% of it to represent you. The rest we're going to give away to radical leftist causes, or we're going to pay our employees and massive overhead. No one, if they actually knew these numbers, would say, yeah, for every dollar I give you to represent me, you're only going to spend 14.3 cents to do so. That's a terrible deal, which is why one of the many reasons why so many Florida teachers have woken up and said, look, I don't want to be part of this. You guys go play your stupid little political game without me. I just want to teach kids and help children learn. That's what the Florida teachers, all the ones that I know, want to do. And consequently, a lot of them are jumping out of the union.
And I bet you a lot of the teachers in Florida are conservatives too, and don't want their money going to Randy and Becky, who just give their money to the Democrats. All of their political spending.
Yeah,
goes
let's
to the
flip
left.
this for a second. Well, let's go to New York, where I assume most teachers are not conservative, right? What if New York, if they said, you know what, we're going to take 86% of your money and away from you, I'm going to spend 14% on you. And then of that, we're going to take about half of it, or a little more than half, and we're going to send it all to Donald Trump. What do you think the teachers in New York would do, right? That's the same exact argument.
Exactly what happened with Zoran Mamdani. A lot of the New York City teachers were even upset about that. Democrats who didn't want them to back Mamdani, the socialist, in the general election. So let's get our next special guest on the screen. Now we have Jonathan Martin. Thanks for joining us, Senator Martin, and thank you for championing Senate Bill 1296.
Yeah, good to be here. Thanks for the invite, and happy to help. This was a great bill.
And right. Senator Martin, first let's start off with, I'm a Floridian as well, so you get the honor of representing the greatest state in America. I see a Gulf of America sign behind your right. Where's your district in the great state?
So if you're familiar with Southwest Florida, about 2 hours south of Tampa, in Lee County, Fort Myers is the county seat. And if you're looking at a map, I represent everything in Lee County west of I-75, except a little corner in North Fort Myers. So I got the islands, Boca Grande, through Sanibel, Captiva, Bonita Beach, all the way down. And then the bulk of the city limits of Fort Myers, all of Cape Coral, which is actually one of the largest cities land-wise in the state of Florida. And
some incredibly beautiful beaches. Now, I'm up in the Panhandle. We think our beaches are even better. But you represent some incredible beaches for sure.
It snows at your beaches though, so our beaches don't have snow. You can swim
once in the last 20 years. Yes, you're right.
And I'm in Texas, so we just copy all your good policies like school choice. We're still lagging severely behind on the number of students we allow to have private school choice in Texas. But we're just getting started, so hopefully that grows over time. But let's talk about your bill, Senate Bill 1290. We were following this very closely all throughout the session. I remember at one point, we didn't know if it was going to get through the Senate. And so could you go over just, I guess, that entire process? And for the average listener, what does Senate Bill 1296 do? Is the sky falling? Does this totally destroy the teaching profession in Florida, or does it make it better?
All of the above. So since I got elected in 2022, we took quite a few steps dealing with public sector unions. Again, this deals with public sector unions, not private unions. If you work in a private industry, which we're in Florida, we don't have a whole lot of manufacturing here, but not a really healthy environment for the private industry unions down here, because frankly, everybody gets a chance to work here. They get paid according to how hard they work. But for some reason, a long time ago, before I was born, in the Florida Constitution, there's a constitutional right for public sector unions to organize. Not a problem. But what we've seen over the past few decades, definitely during my lifetime, is these union dues go to pay for not just political advocacy for the members, but they go to left-wing, almost exclusively, organizations that try to hijack the political process, and ultimately leaving the payer of these union dues holding the bag. So ultimately, they don't get the benefit of the money. They don't get the representation that they think they're getting. And you guys were just talking about that a moment ago. So in 2023, we carry Blazin Goglia, who is now our CFO. The governor appointed him as the chief financial officer about a year ago. He ran a bill that dealt with the required payments, the payroll withdrawals, the automatic withdrawals, and got rid of that. So if you wanted to make that payment to your teachers union or public sector union, you had every right to make that payment, but it was going to be more of an opt-in. You had to actually do it yourself. You couldn't just, I don't want to say be tricked, but a lot of people, when they're going through the startup of a new job, they're filling out a lot of forms, they're signing a lot of documents. There's a lot of things being thrown at you. And a lot of people were being looped into the automatic union due payment without really understanding that they had the ability, the right to not be involved in it. And I think you showed a graphic earlier. I think that was a large contribution in that massive decline in union membership enrollment. It wasn't my bill because it just passed. It was just signed into law this year, so that didn't lead to the graph that you saw that compared the enrollment between 2020 and 2025. So we dealt with that, and then there was also a provision that, look, if you dipped below a certain membership requirement in that union, you had to go through a vote and basically get that entire class together. Whether it's we'll talk about the school district of a specific county, they have one class. They got to have a vote, and they didn't actually dip below that threshold. So they've never gone through this process. But many other organizations dip below that threshold, and so they had to have an organization vote. What we saw was quite a few of these organizations didn't have a vote to certify their class again with complete buy-in from that membership class. So we had some extreme cases of unions in universities or state colleges or some public sector unions where a handful, 2% of the employees in that class showed up to vote. And of course, if you only have 2% voting, it's pretty easy to get a majority of the 2% that went out there to vote. So you had these recertifications taking place, which completely was an unintended consequence of the first law. The goal was, if your union is good, it's not going to be you're not going to have a problem keeping membership. You're not going to have a problem recertifying. But if your union is not doing a good job, people aren't going to show up, right? If they're happy, regardless of what you're doing, they're not going to spend their money. They're not going to go out of their way to vote. But if the administration is evil, if there's a reason to get out there and get more vacation time or whatever it is that this class is trying to get across the finish line, yeah, they're going to be motivated to go vote. But they weren't. So what we saw was just an automatic withdrawals from paychecks going to organizations that really weren't doing anything for the class. And so we had taken great steps over the past few years as well to make sure that teachers were getting pay raises. So the state of Florida gets a pool of money that comes from the local tax collections, local property taxes, and that money is earmarked by the state legislature to do specific things and make sure that that basic standards are being met across the state of Florida. And one of those standards that we wanted to make sure was being met was starting teacher salaries. And so we were using state money to make sure that regardless of what the local decision was on their budget that they had discretion over, we want to make sure that the teachers were getting paid. What we saw specifically in my county, in Lee County, we got a superintendent who was elected through a partisan election. And that's something unique that we passed into law through a referendum process here in Lee County. That was put on the ballot by the state legislature years ago, where we weren't going to appoint our superintendent through the board process. We were going to allow the superintendent to run as a partisan elected official countywide. And as a result, we got a really good conservative, experienced policymaker. And she had some great ideas when she first came into office. She'd worked in the school district for decades, and she had some ideas, and she wanted to implement these ideas. One of them was a stipend to pay teachers to go to a close to failing high school that was located in a less desirable part of the county to live in. On the opposite side of the county from where a lot of teachers lived, she wanted to encourage teachers to go out there to teach those underprivileged students who didn't have another option. Their parents couldn't afford to move, buy a house in a nicer part of town, go to a school closer to where all the teachers lived. So she said, we're going to spend $5,000 per teacher, give them a stipend, because we know they're going to be driving further. We need them out here in this one place, East Lee County, Lehigh Acres area, real close to Immokalee. Look it up if you're not familiar with the geography and the economic data. It's wild. And guess who sued her and said, you cannot pay these teachers that stipend.
Teachers union.
Teachers union of Lee County. So that was for me running this bill. My co-sponsor in the Florida House is also a representative in this area. She's actually now the supervisor of elections here in Lee County. The governor just appointed her to that role a couple months ago.
So no bonuses for teachers because the teachers unions won't allow it.
Right. And of course, it was a garbage argument, but it still frustrated the whole process and the incentives, and teachers wondering, am I going to get the money? Should I make the decision? And we know there's so many good teachers that want to help the kids, especially the ones who have a heart to serve in the public schools, and like you mentioned earlier, we have a great program, vouchers, step up, scholarship, whatever you want to call it, to give everybody the option to go to a private school or to help the homeschool parents with some finances so that their kids can have a good education. But there's a lot of good people that are called into public service and teaching in public schools, but they're not going to make a lot of money doing this. And so to see the teachers union get in the way of that stipend, and these kids just have one shot at the American dream, They
also sued to prevent DeSantis from reopening the schools during COVID as well.
Well, that might get in the way of some of their vacations, right?
There it is.
So,
Senator, it shocks me just how they can't read the room. Like, you're in Florida, the Florida legislature is going to take action when you do something this dumb, but yet they keep going back to the well and doing things this dumb. It would seem like they would finally learn their lesson, but apparently they never do.
And they're losing members. So.
Well, yeah. And again, the steps that we took, common sense steps, and I'm happy to talk more in detail about
so 50% needed to recertify yourself. So you got to get buy-in from your members. That seems pretty obvious.
Right.
The other big part was no taxpayer funding for union time, right? If you want to pay taxpayer money for teachers to teach, good. But if they're using it for time off to go door knocking for Democrats, that shouldn't be allowed, right? Was that included in the bill?
Right. Yeah, and there's a mechanism so the teachers union president can use that money to basically buy their salary from the county. So they're not getting docked on vacation time or their pension or things that kind of count towards the longevity and their ability to retire on time according to schedule. So it's not just a check to them, but it backfills their payment and their benefits that they're using.
So I remember back in February of this year, there was a viral video that went around, and the Tampa Bay Times said that the Florida Teachers Union was going to get away with it if it weren't for the meddling AFFT guy, Corey DeAngelo, sharing this this video. Do you remember this one? And was this talked about a lot in the legislature? This press conference,
the walkouts, yes.
The NBA, they had a speaker. Then they tried to backpedal and say, "Oh, we didn't know he was going to say that." But this kid is known for doing student walkouts.
And in one of those individuals in the background was actually the president of the Lee County Teachers Association. So
the same
nodding in agreement. So yeah, that's what happened. And I think they got caught with their hand in the cookie jar. They tried to backtrack it and do all the damage control they possibly could.
But then I'd respond to Andrew. Sorry, I would respond to Andrew Spar, the teachers union president, and say, well, if you didn't mean that, then, well, why did you invite him? And why didn't you have anybody who gave the other side of the story that was pro law enforcement and immigration enforcement? Why was it only one side? It never responded.
I go to plenty of press conferences. If I hear somebody say something I disagree with, you're not going to see a smile and a nod in agreement. Yeah. Maybe I didn't hear the whole thing. Maybe I was daydreaming or thinking about something that I was about to say, or looking at a text message. You're not going to see me affirmatively go out of my way to nod in agreement with something I didn't hear. and definitely not something I disagreed with. In fact, my staff will call me out sometimes and say, you should see your face. If somebody says something I disagree with, I'm
shaking your head
around my face. And definitely if I got to the podium after they said it, I would say something to clarify my position and how, okay, that's their opinion, but let me tell you what my opinion is.
So the speaker said that they didn't just support the walkouts, they said they were required. Here was the tweet from the teachers union president. To be clear, we don't organize or encourage student walkouts. We invited a speaker. He gave his personal opinion, but you know,
this was after the walkouts already happened.
Yes, it just total backpedaling. And so at that point, you know, there were daily videos protesting this bill. There was also
a CBS article, if I could touch on it. Just I don't know if anybody reads CBS News, but there was a question early on in my first committee stop. They asked, one of the senators asked me who had the ability to set the date and the time for these union votes. The teachers have a play, or the teachers union has a play in that, but they also coordinate it with the state of Florida. CBS said that was a lie because they got one side of the story. I think they might have asked me for my comment, you know, like how they normally do, just a minute or so before they hit the print button.
Yeah, of course.
And then secondly, they tried to call me a hypocrite by saying, because the provision in here that was the most controversial part was the 50% of the teachers or the class. Talking about teachers, this applies to all public sectors unions that aren't first responders. The reason for that is the state of Florida courts have interpreted the Constitution to allow us to treat each of those public sector classes differently. But 50% should show up. The CBS, and this is CBS News. This is the big shot. These are the best of the best of the best.
Was it this one? Critics of the union busting bill say it attacks Florida.
Yeah, that might be it. It was early on. It was in March. Or that actually could have been later.
There's
on.
A couple of them.
But they said that, well, I wouldn't have been elected if I followed the same rules that we were trying to propose in this bill. Well, first of all, it's a completely separate circumstance. Thirdly, they're wrong. I actually carried a majority, like not just a majority of the people that showed up to vote me into office. This is how bad it is. I got a majority of the registered voters in my district to affirmatively vote for me. And I have 600,000 people in my district. I got a majority of the voters, not 600,000, about 300. Most of them voted for me, more than half. So CBS was, I don't want to say they're liars. I'm sure
they didn't do their due diligence.
They don't know how to find out the results of elections, but that's just what we deal with all the time. And it's unfortunate. We know people that only rely on the mainstream media because they're busy. They have busy lives. So thank you, regardless of that. Despite that, you're doing this to get the message out.
And the notion is quite silly on its face. I mean, first of all, we have to have elected officials, and so what are they going to do? Say if not half the voters show up, then there's no election.
We're going to compulsory voting next, like Australia.
Right. We don't have to have a union. Like that's not necessary. Like that is, all of us can live the rest of our lives and not have another public sector school teachers union. But to your point, the whole genesis behind this is to say, look, if you're going to represent the teachers, you got to have at least half the teachers, or you should have half the teachers that support you. And it's pretty simple.
And look, and that's why I answered yes generically to your first question. The good unions, the ones who are doing good things, the ones that are helping their workers, are not going to have a problem with this. They're not going to fall under this. This is only for those unions who lost membership, who can't keep that bare minimum membership requirement. This is the recertification process.
I think I saw in Miami-Dade, they had some teachers union bosses who just were sentenced to 2 years in prison or something for embezzling millions of dollars. I think this was like a year or two ago, and this was in Florida. And it just goes to show you, like, sometimes the worst rise to the top in the unions. And there's a lot, and they don't represent your everyday teacher who's just trying to focus on the basics and doing a good job. It's the people that control the unions and the political funding who I think are just super radicalized.
I think we all agree that our country was founded on certain principles. First and foremost, that our rights don't come from government, they come from God. Secondly, if we were angels, if we were perfect people, we wouldn't need government. We'd all just do the right thing. We'd be super efficient. We'd work together. There'd be no need for a court system or laws or anything. But because we understand those two basic principles, you have to have checks and balances. And the unions were just running amok, very little checks and balances, very little oversight, to the point where people weren't even showing up to vote for their unions, and the union bosses were just collecting money and then, of course, spending those dues for things that weren't directly related to the benefit of the membership.
So I remember the House passed first, right? And that was Jenna Persons.
It's not a race. I don't know what happened.
Yeah. So was there any, like, what was the most difficult part? I know we're getting towards the top of the end of the hour, but was there like a moment where it was like, make it or break it? Is this going to happen?
There was. The day it was on the floor to debate, it had gone through 3 committees in the Senate. The last committee stopped in the Senate in order to get the votes through. I worked with a couple Republican senators who didn't like the bill the way it had passed through the first 2 committees. We made changes. Then it gets to the floor. The House version is going to come over. And we were not in agreement. So the changes that were made at the third stop were different than what the House wanted. And so something had to give, right? And so sometimes, and I had a couple bills this session that died because you make a decision. Like, I know we got it this far. It's at the floor. It's the last day of session or the last week. And I had one that died after the afternoon of the last day of session because we just couldn't reach an agreement. This one, I personally cared enough about. I talked to the members that wanted the changes in the third committee stop, told them that wasn't going to mix, or that wasn't going to mesh with the House version. The governor was working overtime on this. His chief of staff, Jason Weta, Stasi, the commissioner of education for the state of Florida, phenomenal. The White House had weighed in. The Secretary of Education had weighed in on Twitter. I mean, this was a big deal, and it was moving it in the right direction. So, I don't like changing bills on the floor. It happens occasionally. It happens to a lot of my bills, a lot of things. I'm the criminal justice chair, so it's a first stop committee. A lot of the changes I make first stop get written out of it by the time it gets to the floor or on the floor itself. So I'm familiar with my language not making it. Everyone's familiar with their language getting changed. But yeah, there was there were some people who were upset about the changes that were made on the floor of the Senate to match the bill as it had come through the previous 2
And it had to go back to the House for concurrence after that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So it was stressful. So there was a lot of vote counting. We had leadership, going around checking votes, and I mean, it's a bigger deal, I think, in the House to check all the votes. In the Senate, there's
not as many
40 of us, right? And so 28 Republicans. I'm not going to name the specific Democrat, but talk about the impetus for me getting involved in this and the type of school and the students who have one shot at the American dream.
Right.
There are Democrats who come from very, very, very blue cities who do not like the teachers unions over there. They were elected to go in and either serve on a school board or serve in Tallahassee and make sure that everybody there in their district has an opportunity to live the American dream. So behind the scenes, they were actually being very helpful. I actually had some Democrats that were more helpful than some Republicans. Again, I'm not naming any names.
Right. Yeah, I think I remember.
It was very, there was a lot of 3D chess going on. But of course, look, it's one of many bills that goes through, and you just got to make sure that there's as much buy-in as possible, and you can't be yes on every bill. Understand that, and just make sure that you're working with the people that you have to rely on for other important policies that are great supporters of other great policies that many other states are jealous of.
Are there any tweaks on the radar for changing any part of this bill in a future session, or are we kind of sitting back and see how it rolls out and kind of?
I haven't heard of any right now, and I don't know if you're aware, we just had our primary elections in the state of Florida 2 days ago. Yeah. So we're gonna have a new governor. Hopefully, it's a Republican governor. Our nominee is Byron Donalds. He and Erica Donalds have been very involved in education policy over the last decade. I've known them for almost 2 decades now. What's and I don't want to leave them out. They were also very influential with the social media. And you think an election year, it's not Republicans versus Democrats. There's factions within the Republican Party, factions within the Democrat Party. They were very helpful. This was an all hands on deck. There were no factions in the Republican Party getting this bill across.
Well, I can't believe we're already at 4 o'clock Central Time, 5 o'clock Eastern. This conversation, this entire podcast has flown by. But we want to thank you, Senator Martin, for joining us. Thank you for championing this legislation, Senate Bill 1296, and getting it to the governor's desk, and ultimately improving the working conditions for teachers in the state of Florida, and ultimately improving the education for kids in the state of Florida as well. So anything else you'd like to leave us with on where you'd like to, anything you'd like to plug? Yeah,
like I said, we're in the general election now. So getting our candidates across the finish line is important for both sides. And I want to make sure that that your listeners, your viewers know that Florida is focused on taking care of our students, making sure that they have the opportunity, the tools to live the American dream.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Senator.
Until next time, hopefully we have some great updates after November out of Florida. Thank you, Senator Martin.
Of course. Take care.
Thanks, Senator.
All right, Chip, we had other stories, but I think we're at the end of the hour. So I want to remind everybody that Americans for Fair Treatment, if you want to join us, we've surpassed 20,000 members already. You go to myduesmychoice.org. I think that's the easier one, honestly. myduesmychoice.org. You want to opt out of your union, you can do that. You can also go to americansforfairtreatment.org. And if you want to check out on our website, you'll see at the top, you can look into where the money's going in Florida. You just look at that banner. You'll see how much money's going to Randy and Becky, how much money is being spent on politics, and how the membership is really bleeding from the teachers unions in Florida. Thankfully, because of groups like Americans for Fair Treatment telling teachers they have the right to keep their own money and stop paying the people they disagree with politically. You can't be forced to join a union anymore. So thanks, Chip.
Thanks, Corey. Another great show. Appreciate your time.
Yep. Thanks, everybody, for hopping on. Until next time, this was the Red Pen Podcast, and hope to see you guys again soon.